In this lesson, we are going to be going over rules and properties for multiplication. When we multiply two items together, there are four options that we have. We can either multiply together two items that have the same sign, which are both positive, or two items that are both negative. In either of these two cases, our answer is going to be positive. We can also multiply together items that have different signs. Our two options here are going to be a positive times a negative, or a negative times a positive. In both of these cases, our answer is going to be negative. So whenever we multiply together two items that have the same sign, whether they're both positive or both negative, our answer is going to be positive. If we multiply together two terms that have different signs, our answer is going to be negative. When we multiply together an expression that has more than two terms, there are a couple different ways that we can do this. The way that I use most often is to figure out what my sign is first. So in this example, we have a negative times a positive, which is a negative, and we have that negative times another negative, which will give us a positive answer. So now that I know the sign of my answer, I am going to go ahead and multiply together my numbers. So I have 2 times 3, which gives me 6, and then I have 6 times 5, which gives me 30. And I know from the work that we just did that my answer is positive, so I have a positive 30 as my product. In this example, I am still going to go through and figure out what my sign is first. So I have a negative times a positive, which gives me a negative, and a negative times a negative, which gives me a positive. I have a positive times a negative, which gives me a negative, and a negative times a positive, which means I am going to end up with a negative answer. Now I'm going to worry about my numbers. So 2 times 4, which is 8, 8 times 3, which is 24, 24 times 1, which is 24, and then 24 times 2, which gives me 48. And we know from before that our answer is going to be negative, so our answer is negative 48. The second way that we can multiply an expression that has more than two terms is to just take it term by term. So in this example, we would start with negative 2 times positive 5, which would give us a negative 10. Then we have negative 10 times by a negative 3, which will give us a positive 30. Then we have positive 30 times by negative 2, which will give us a negative 60. When multiplying both positive and negative numbers together, there is a shortcut that we can use to help us figure out what the sign of our answer is going to be. We are only going to look at our negative terms, and we're going to count up the number of negatives that we have in our expression. If there is an even number of negative signs, we will get a positive answer. If there is an odd number of negative signs, we will get a negative product. In our first example, we have 1, 2, 3 negative signs. 3 is an odd number, therefore, by our trick, we know that we are going to get a negative answer. If you want to double check, you can go negative times a negative is a positive, times a positive is a positive, times a negative is indeed a negative product. In our bottom example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives. Since we have 4 negatives and 4 is an even number, we know that our answer will be positive. Just to double check, we have a negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative, times another negative is a positive. So our answer will be positive. When we are multiplying an expression that has variables, I break this into 3 different steps. My first step is to figure out what sign our product is going to be. So for this example, we have a negative times a positive, which gives us a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a negative will give us a negative number, or a negative answer. Then I worry about my numbers. So we have 2 times 3, which is 6, and 6 times 4, which is 24. And then I go back and I figure out what my variables are going to be. And in this case, we just have an x, so we're going to multiply our negative 24 by x, so that our answer is negative 24x, which says we have a negative 24 and we're multiplying it times an x. We will also have situations in which we have more than one variable in our product. In this case, I'm going to start off exactly how I did the last one. I'm going to figure out what my sign is going to be. So I have a negative times a positive, which is a negative, times a negative, which is a positive, times a negative, which will give me a negative product. Then I'm going to go back and see if I have any numbers. In this example, I only have one number, my 2, so I'm going to jot that down. Now I go back and I deal with my variables. In this case, I have 3 x's. So I have x times an x times an x. Now if we go back to our exponent rules, when we have the same number multiplied by itself different times, we count up the number of times it's multiplied by itself, and that is going to be our exponent. So in this example, my base is x, and I'm multiplying it by itself 3 times, so my exponent is going to be 3. Therefore, our answer is negative 2 times x cubed. When dealing with negatives and exponents, we are actually going to write out our expression completely. So in this example, it is saying we want our base, which is negative x, to be multiplied by itself 4 times. So we have negative x times negative x times negative x times negative x. Now we have an expression like we are used to seeing, so we're going to figure out what our sign is going to be in our product. We have a negative times a negative, which is a positive, times a negative, which is a negative, times a negative, which will be a positive. Then we don't have any numbers to deal with, so we are going to write out our x, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, so we have a positive x to the 4th as our answer. Now what happens if we have a number or a negative sign outside of our parenthesis? Well, if there isn't a number there, we know that there is an invisible 1, so we can write that in. And then we're still going to do the exact same thing that we did before, except this time we have a negative 1 in front, but then we still have negative x times negative x times negative x times negative x. So we have 4 negative x's multiplied by each other, and in this example we have a negative 1 in front. To figure out what our product is, we're going to go through and figure out our signs. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and then we have times a negative giving us a negative, times a negative giving us a positive, so we have 4 negatives, so we're at a positive. Now we have times one more negative, which is going to give us a negative answer. We can write down our 1 or whatever number we have after we're done multiplying our numbers together. And now we're going to deal with our x's. So I'm going to write down my x, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So I go to the power of 4. So this time our answer is negative 1 or negative x to the 4th power. In this example, I don't have any parentheses around my negative and my x, which means that the base of my power is going to be just x. So when I write this out, I'm going to have a negative 1 times an x times an x times an x times an x. So my answer for this is just simply negative 1 x to the 1, 2, 3, 4 to the 4th power. When we come across expressions that have exponents in it, we are going to want to expand our expression out. So for this, we're going to have 2 times negative x, which just took care of our power, times an x times negative 3. Now that we have expanded out our expression and gotten rid of our exponent, we are going to figure out what our product is. So first I'm going to figure out what my signs are. Well, positive times a negative is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a positive is a positive, times a negative is a negative. Now I'm going to deal with my numbers. So 2 times 3 gives me 6. Now I have 1, 2, 3 x's, so I have x cubed. So our answer is negative 6x to the 3rd power. Just like we do for addition, we also have properties for multiplication. The commutative property of multiplication means that the order in which we multiply numbers does not change the product. So I can have A times B, and that's going to be the same as B times A. In other words, 3 times 4 is 12, just like 4 times 3 is 12. The associative property of multiplication means that we can group numbers in any way when multiplying, and it is not going to change our product, or it's not going to change our answer. So we can have the quantity A times B times C, and that's going to be the same thing as A times the quantity B times C. We also have an identity property of multiplication, which means that if we have a number and we multiply it by 1, we are going to get the number back, or the identity of the number. So if we have A times 1, we're going to get A back. So 5 times 1 equals 5.